If you grew up black in the 70s or 80s, the sound of a screen door slamming still pulls you back to a summer evening. You can almost hear your mother's voice calling you inside before the streetlights came on. That memory never really leaves the body at all. There's another sound just like it, the click of a record needle dropping onto vinyl in a living room. That room smelled like hot combs and Sunday dinner cooking at the same time, all at once. That smell, that click, that voice calling your name across a yard, it all lives in the same place inside you, waiting to surface again. Today, we're talking about something a lot of us carry quietly, something rarely spoken about at the barbershop or the dinner table. We're talking about the inner world of Black Gen X men who, somewhere along the way, ended up living alone. Not lonely necessarily, but alone in a way that feels different from what our fathers and uncles experienced. Different from the crowded houses we grew up in, where privacy was a luxury nobody could afford. Before we get into that, think back to your own childhood home, the one with too many people and never enough hot water. Tell me in the comments where you grew up, what generation raised you, and which memory hits you first. Because before we understand the man alone in his apartment now, we have to understand the boy who never had a room of his own. Picture a house in the late 70s, maybe a duplex on a block where every porch had a story. Inside that house, there was no such thing as silence. Not really, not ever. There were siblings sharing beds and cousins staying over for a few days that turned into months. There was a grandmother in the front room running the whole operation without raising her voice. The television only had one channel that mattered on Saturday mornings, and everybody knew it. Getting the good seat on the couch, the one without the plastic slipcover, was a small daily victory. You learned early that your time and your thoughts belonged partly to everyone else in that house. That's just how it worked when family meant everybody living under one roof. That plastic-covered couch always leads back to the smell of blue magic hair grease before church, a hot comb warming on the stove, the whole kitchen filling with that particular Sunday morning smell. 5 people trying to get ready in one bathroom, someone always yelling that they were going to be late. Your mother moved through the house like a general getting her troops into formation. There was no space to be quiet in that house, even if you wanted to be. Quiet simply wasn't an option yet, not with that many bodies moving through small rooms. And somehow, in the middle of all that noise, you felt something you couldn't name back then. You felt completely safe, even while being told to hurry up for the 100th time. Church became its own kind of extended family, a room full of women who corrected your posture faster than your mother ever could. The organ would start low and build, and the whole choir seemed to lean forward together. Afterward, out in the parking lot, the real gathering happened, the part everybody secretly came for. Women in their hats compared notes, while men in good suits talked low, laughing from somewhere deep in the chest. Kids ran between legs, trying not to get caught doing something they had no business doing. Nobody was ever truly alone at church, not for one single second.
Being seen and being known was the entire point of showing up in the first place. That feeling of being known everywhere followed you straight into the neighborhood, where every adult had permission to correct you. Somebody's mother would catch you doing something wrong 3 streets over, and word traveled faster than you could walk home. There was a strange comfort buried inside that lack of privacy, even though it didn't feel like comfort in the moment. It felt more like surveillance, like you could never fully exhale around anybody. But looking back now, that watchfulness was really just love wearing a stern face. A whole community had decided, without ever saying it out loud, that none of its children would fall through the cracks. That thought about the block always drifts towards summer, toward the sound of an ice cream truck cutting through humid August air. You'd hear that bell 2 streets away, and your body would react before your brain caught up. Kids dug through couch cushions for change they didn't actually have. The ones who did have money became temporary royalty for the rest of the afternoon. Summer nights meant extension cords running from someone's window out to a record player on the porch. Grown folks two-stepped in the street, while kids caught lightning bugs nearby in mason jars. Those summer nights, full of music that spilled out past midnight, are hard to separate from school starting back up in September. New notebooks, a fresh haircut, clothes that still had that store-bought stiffness to them. School felt like a stage where you had to prove something new every single day. It was also the first place many of us learned to perform without anyone giving that behavior a name. You adjusted your voice depending on which room you walked into, home or classroom. Loud and free at home, quiet and careful in a classroom where you were often the only one. That early lesson in shifting yourself to fit a room followed a lot of these boys for life. That skill of shifting yourself carried straight into the walk home, past the corner store with the bell over the door. Somebody always had $1 to split 3 ways for a bag of chips and a soda. There was a kind of math you did on those walks, dividing candy fairly so nobody's feelings got hurt. Those corner store negotiations were the first real lessons in fairness some of these boys ever got. Long before anyone used a word like diplomacy, they were practicing it on a sidewalk. And that walk home always ended the same way, with a mixtape playing low from somebody's boombox on a stoop. I still remember one afternoon, sitting on my grandmother's back steps while she shelled peas into a metal bowl. The rhythm of it was slow and steady, almost like a heartbeat you could set your watch to. I must have been 7 or 8 when I asked her something that had been bothering me. I asked why Uncle Ray always got so quiet whenever the house filled up with too many people. She didn't answer right away, just kept working her thumbs along the pod, unhurried. Then she said something I didn't understand until decades later, something that stayed with me. She said some men learn to disappear inside a crowded room because it's the only privacy they're ever offered. I didn't know it then, but she was describing a whole generation of men before mine.
Men who never had a door of their own to close, who carried a quiet hunger for solitude. That afternoon taught me, without either of us saying it directly, that silence can be a wound too. That memory of Uncle Ray's silence always leads back to the sound of the television at night, once the house had settled. Everybody had their designated spot by then, a corner of a couch, a pillow on the floor. The glow of the screen was the last thing you saw before falling asleep most nights. Shows back then had a rhythm to them, familiar theme songs that meant it was almost bedtime. There was a strange comfort in that predictability, in a house that otherwise felt unpredictable in every other way. That borrowed structure gave a lot of us kids the only order we could count on. That same sense of order, oddly enough, is what a lot of these men chase now in their own quiet apartments. Here's the thing nobody talks about enough. Living alone isn't running from family, not exactly. It's often a man finally claiming something he was never given as a boy. Growing up in houses that were loud, generous, and full of love, but almost never quiet, teaches you something. It teaches you that solitude is a kind of forbidden fruit, something other people get to have. So when that boy grows into a man with his own lease, his own remote, his own silence, something in him exhales. It isn't loneliness sitting in that apartment most nights. It's relief, decades delayed finally arriving at the door. But that relief carries its own complicated weight because these men were raised to believe a real man fills a house with people. There's a quiet tension living inside a lot of these apartments, a low hum underneath the peace. A voice asking whether enjoying the silence means something has gone wrong somewhere along the way. Nobody sat these men down and told them solitude could be chosen instead of endured, that a quiet Tuesday night alone with a plate of food could be its own kind of success. So many of them sit with that tension privately, turning it over the way their grandmother turned peas, looking for the parts worth keeping and setting the rest quietly aside. That image of turning something over always brings me back to my father's toolbox, sitting untouched in the garage for weeks. Then something in the house would finally break, and out came the tools. He wasn't a man who talked much about his feelings, not in any way you'd recognize as talking, but you could watch him work on a leaking faucet and somehow understand exactly what kind of week he'd had. There was a language in the way he held a wrench, a silence that had nothing to do with the faucet. A lot of these Gen X men learned emotional expression that way, sideways, through fixing things instead of naming them. Now, living alone, there's no faucet leaking loud enough to justify the silence they've finally learned to sit inside. That kind of quiet presence reminds me of the barber shop, one of the only places these men could really talk in their own way. It was never really about the haircut at all, not if you paid attention. It was about the debate over the game, the teasing, older men passing down opinions about everything under the sun. It was one of the only rooms where vulnerability slipped in disguised as humor, where a joke could carry real weight. A lot of these men still chase that feeling now, calling an old friend to argue about a football game. That call isn't really about football at all. It's about reaching for a version of connection that still feels familiar, still feels safe. And safety keeps circling back to the block parties these men grew up attending every single summer. Somebody's uncle running the grill, a boombox blasting from a car with the doors thrown wide open, dominoes slapping down on a card table hard enough to rattle the ice in every cup nearby. There was a rhythm to those gatherings, an unspoken choreography everybody understood without needing instructions. Being part of that rhythm meant belonging to something much bigger than your own individual life. A lot of these men still crave that rhythm now, even while building lives centered around independence. Belonging and solitude were never actually opposites for them. Not really, not underneath it all. The apartment gets quiet, but the group chat still hums with old friends, keeping that rhythm alive from a distance. That distance, though, is where things get complicated, because a phone screen is not the same as a porch full of faces.
A lot of these men will tell you, if you catch them in an honest moment, what the hardest part is. It isn't the quiet itself. It's the absence of witnesses to an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Growing up, somebody always saw you. Somebody always knew if you'd had a good day or a bad one. Now, a whole week can pass without another soul noticing whether he ate dinner or made it home safe. That particular kind of invisibility is new for this generation, a silence their grandparents' crowded houses never allowed to exist. But there's no bitterness hiding in that invisibility, at least not for most of these men if you catch them being honest. There's something closer to hard-won peace living underneath it instead, quiet and unbothered. Remember, these are men who watched their mothers and grandmothers give everything to everybody else in the house. Watching that sacrifice up close taught these boys something nobody ever said out loud on purpose. It taught them that solitude was something you earned through service, never something you simply deserved outright. So a 50-year-old man cooking a meal just for himself, savoring it slowly with nobody needing anything from him, is doing something quietly radical. He's rewriting a rule he inherited without ever agreeing to it in the first place. That rewriting reminds me of the second afternoon I still think about often, the one that changed how I saw my father. I was maybe 15, home from school early, and I found him sitting alone on the back porch. It was the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and he was doing absolutely nothing at all. No radio, no newspaper, no tools in his hands, just sitting there with his eyes closed. He was letting the sun move slowly across his face without a single interruption. I asked him what he was doing, half worried something might be wrong with him. He told me he was just being quiet for a minute, something he said he never got to do enough. I didn't understand it then, being 15 and needing him to always be doing something useful. I understand it completely now, watching men his age finally find that same stillness decades later than they should have. That stillness he finally found for himself on a random Tuesday afternoon is, in a strange way, exactly what these men have built lives around. The apartment with one chair positioned perfectly by the window, catching the afternoon light just right. Coffee made exactly one way because nobody else's preferences need to be considered anymore, ever. the freedom to leave dishes in the sink overnight without a single soul judging him for it. These small, almost invisible freedoms carry enormous emotional weight for men who spent childhoods negotiating space with everybody else, negotiating attention, negotiating even their own silence under one crowded roof after another. Living alone, for this generation of black men, isn't really about being solitary at all. It's about finally getting to choose, for the first time in his whole life, how much of himself gets shared. And that act of choosing, more than anything else, might be the real story hiding underneath all of this. Not sadness, not isolation, but a long-delayed kind of self-authorship these men are only now discovering. These men were raised inside families that gave them everything except one thing every child eventually needs: a room, a moment, a silence that belonged entirely to them and nobody else at all. So when you see a black Gen X man living alone now, humming to himself while he cooks dinner, talking back to the television with nobody there to hear him laugh at his own jokes, understand that you're not looking at someone who lost something important along the way. You're looking at someone who finally found something instead, something his father never quite got the chance to claim. It makes you wonder what memory is sitting quietly inside you right now, waiting for the right sound to surface it again. Maybe it's a porch, maybe it's a kitchen, maybe it's the silence of somebody you loved sitting alone with their thoughts. Tell me in the comments where you grew up, what generation shaped you, and whether you recognize any part of this, whether you see it inside your own father, your own uncle, or maybe even inside yourself right now. These conversations only get richer the more of you share your own version of this same memory. So don't hold back, because somebody reading this needs to hear they're not the only one who feels this way. If this reached something in you, stay close, because there's another one of these memories waiting for us. It's right around the next corner, whenever you're ready to go looking for it together.